Hello, Hawks. Mrs. Brothers here, and I'm here with Ted Kincaid, who so generously shared his artwork with us. Hello, Mr. Kincaid. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing so well. I'm so excited to have you here. Mr. Kincaid, you have such an impressive portfolio. You have work in permanent collections at the DMA, the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston and San Antonio, Neiman Marcus Collection, and you have had many artworks shared throughout the nation. Um, And on top of it, you're an art teacher at Plano West, where some of my students will end up going to high school.
Yeah.
That's so incredible. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming an artist?
I was the elementary school student that drew all the time and was not great about not drawing when I wasn't supposed to. So all my homework had doodles and drawings all over it. And I kind of knew from very, very early on that I really wanted to be an artist.
Oh,
So I went to college and I got a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, both in studio art. So that's where you go to school and study a different form of art that you want to pursue. And I decided to study photography and printmaking.
I love it. Those are such exciting fields. And our fourth graders got a little bit of a chance to work with printmaking this year, and I think some of them are really interested. That's so exciting.
Excellent.
Is there anything you'd like to share with us about the series you decided to share with our students before we begin?
The series that you are studying was going to be a real exhibit at Tally Dunn Gallery, which is the gallery that represents my work in Texas. But unfortunately, because we are all on quarantine, we are going to have this as a virtual exhibit. So it is opening at the end of this month online. So this is the first time I've done an online exhibit like this, but we want everybody to stay safe. So I'd rather people see them online and be healthy. So
I love that so much. And I love that you're making art accessible during this difficult time. So the first artwork that I shared with my students was Fantasia on a Dutch Landscape 221. Is there anything you'd like to share about this artwork before I dive into student questions?
well, I like to consider it a painting, and I present them as paintings. They're very large and on canvas, but they are in fact painted totally digitally.
Wow, that is awesome. I love that you decided to present them as paintings. Um, my first question from a student is, how did you make it and what is it made of? So you just shared it was made of digital, or if you want to share what tool you used.
Yes, I work mainly in Photoshop. Um, these are my compositions based on colors and shapes from painters throughout history that have been really influential on me. This piece is from a period in art in the 1600s in Holland. And a lot of the Dutch painters painted landscapes that had a very specific color and look to them and captured the spirit of the landscape very well. So what I'm doing is I'm going into these paintings and I'm digitally sampling all the colors and shapes and forms. And then I take all of those and lay them out on my screen, sort of like a painter's palette, and start using those to digitally paint my own version of a Dutch landscape.
Wow, incredible. Um, Another student asks, what were you thinking when making this artwork? So maybe what was on your mind?
Well, I was thinking, and I noticed this because we travel a lot and I enjoy going to different places. And when I looked at all these paintings throughout history, from the Italian Renaissance, the Northern Renaissance, the Hudson River School, which is a school of American landscape painting from the 1800s,
Mhm.
they all had a very different color palette from each other.
Hmm.
And I assumed that the painters made up those color palettes. And it's great if you do make up a color palette. But when I traveled to these places, when I went to Venice, I noticed that the painter Giovanni Bellini did not make that color scheme up. You looked outside the window and you saw those colors in the sky, and you saw those
Mhm.
colors reflected on the buildings and the landscape. And then when I went to Amsterdam, I noticed the same. The Dutch painters were painting what they saw. And it really amazed me that light can affect a landscape very differently in different locations. So the light that we see in Texas
Hmm.
is very different than the light you would see in the Hudson River Valley or in Holland or any other place. Light reacts very differently, and that fascinates me.
That is so exciting. And I think my students will be especially fascinated by that. We are an IB World School, so we're always trying to consider how things are in different places in the world. So that's very enlightening. Thank you. Um, Another student asks, why did you make the clouds like this?
I made the clouds, well, when I first started doing this, the clouds were my photographs of clouds that I would do the same thing to. I would take a photograph of a real cloud, and then I would take it apart digitally and I would put it back together in a radically different order to emphasize the unreal quality of it.
Mm.
Um, the reason they have a blurry, fleeting look to them is because clouds are always changing,
Hmm.
and every second they're slightly different. So I love that very ephemeral quality. I
Absolutely.
also like the fact that these clouds look, you can identify them as clouds, but they almost have a spaceship look to them or a mechanical look to them. And I like playing with the fact that the viewer can look at these and see very different things, just the same way as we all can look at clouds and see very different images in them.
That's incredible. And I love that you made those comments because when I was reading to student responses, I should have clarified before. When I shared these artworks, I asked the students what they see, what they think, and what they wonder. And I had multiple students say that they felt a sense of awe when looking at the clouds. And I also had a student make a connection to space. So I think that's really exciting that
I
that
love that. That's
carried through. Another student asks, how long did it take to make?
when I first started this process, making clouds like this, they took a very long time. As you get more skilled in a process, they come somewhat quicker, but
Mhm.
these take anywhere from a couple of days to a month, depending upon when you're happy with the way they look. Sometimes, the light that touches the landscape is the same light that touches the clouds. And so the colors that you see in the clouds have to sort of reflect that commonality. And sometimes that's very difficult to get. So I can, get stuck on one of these
Mhm.
and have to put it away for a while and work on another one. And sometimes when I work on that piece, it makes me realize what I can do on the previous piece to make it successful. So a very wide range of time.
Fantastic. And I love that you mentioned that you took a break from a work and came back to it. I think that's a great practice as an artist,
Very much.
to make sure that your work is thoughtful whenever you're making it. Wonderful. Another student asked, where is this place in the world? Which I think you kind of referenced with another response, but if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
This is the Netherlands. And the reason the landscape has a very flat look to it is a lot of that country is technically below sea level. It is quite a flat expanse of space, and they have been able to keep it from flooding by building a lot of dams to keep the seawater out. So, as opposed to a very mountainous area, the area of the Netherlands has this beautiful flat farmland look.
The next artwork I shared with the students was Fantasia on a Landscape by Joachim Patner, 715. Is there anything you'd like to share about this artwork before we begin with questions?
Okay, this is based on an artwork from an area not too far from the Netherlands. It's an area that is now called Belgium, but
Oh,
during that period it was called Flanders. So a different, close but different part of Europe, a very different landscape and a very different set of light. And this painting was from the what is a period in art that's called the Northern Renaissance. The Renaissance happened in more places than just Italy. And although we study Italy a lot when we study the Renaissance, There was also a enormous renaissance in painting in Flanders.
The first question from a student is, what were you thinking when you made this artwork?
What I was thinking in this one, this was the very first digital painting I made that included the landscape. All my previous ones were just the sky and clouds. And I wanted to move forward and somehow expand on what I was doing. And I thought, since the landscapes were so influential on me, why was I just paying attention to the sky and the clouds? So this is the very first one that I was trying to get the sky and the ground.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that you said that, because my next question was, were you trying to make a specific background?
Yes, very much so. This painter, Joachim Patner, is one of my favorite painters in history, and there aren't a lot of paintings of his left. But what I liked about them is the paintings always were about an event, a story from the Bible or mythology that concerned people. But in all of his paintings, the people and the story are very, very tiny. And you can tell what he loved painting was the landscape and the skies. So there is a very famous painting of his about a certain Bible story about a couple traveling to Egypt. And you would expect in another painting for the couple to be very large and take up most of the painting. But they're very small, very, very small. And the rest of what you see is this beautiful, beautiful Patner landscape.
The next question from a student was, what are you trying to say with this image?
I am trying to convey how beautiful it is to look at the natural world and how fleeting it is. And fleeting means it changes constantly. So that is why you see a lot of blur and ambiguity in my work. Is I think that beauty changes all the time and is very much tied to just the second. So that's what I kind of want the viewer to have, that sense and a little sense of awe, because the Earth is an amazing planet, and there's so many beautiful things to see in it. I just kind of want to be able to somehow try to capture the same thing.
I love that. I thought this was a very bold question, so I had to include it. A student asked, are you proud of this work?
I am, for the reasons that I said, that it was the first one that I included landscape on that I really felt worked. When as an artist, when you try things, you don't know if they'll work. I mean, that's part of the joy of being an artist, is pushing yourself and finding, new ways of doing things. So this was a big push for me. And so, yes, I am proud of this one.
That's fantastic, and a perfect response, because I think the biggest thing I want my students to learn is that every work of art is a stepping stone to your next work of art. So I love that response.
Yes, and when I finish one of these, I'm always thinking ahead to the next one. That's the fun part of being an artist. You never create the perfect piece of art. The beauty in art is sometimes the mistakes.
I completely agree. I thought this question was very fun and whimsical. A student asks about what life would be like if the clouds were like the ones in this image.
Oh, well, personally, I'd love it. But yeah, clouds are so beautiful to me anyway. And, we sometimes, when people ask what color clouds are, we say, well, they're white. But they're not. They're all sorts of different colors depending on the play of light and how light strikes them. And, clouds can be brilliant orange and creamsicle pink and, dark black, depending on, the environment. And so I think it would be fun if clouds looked like this, but I think clouds are beautiful just like they are.
Absolutely. A student asks what time the picture was taken.
Well, since it's a painting, or since it's a digital painting based
Hmm.
on a painting, I would say from looking at it, if you notice the bottom of the clouds have that pale orange tint to them,
Hmm.
that usually happens when the sun is either rising or setting. So
Hmm.
I would say this would be a sunset, close to sunset image.
I love it. Fantastic. And another student asks why one side of the grass is blue and one side is green.
That's a really interesting question. What happens when we look at the sky and the sky is blue is because we're looking through more and more atmosphere. And what the painters of the Renaissance were able to capture is as you look further and further away in a landscape and it gets farther and farther away from you, you're looking through more atmosphere, just like you're looking at the sky. And so things tend to be paler and more blue as they go further and further in the distance. I bet if you went back and showed students some examples of landscapes that showed
Mhm.
great distances in the Renaissance, you'll see it. And it's a term in art that's called atmospheric perspective.
Maybe we will take some time, fourth grade, and explore that concept next year when we're back together. I think that would be so much fun. The third image we looked at was Fantasia on George Inness's Delaware Water Gap. First question I got from a student was, why did you make this a series?
I made this a series because, like I said earlier, I loved how light influences a landscape. And how different it is in different parts of the world, and how painters were so very good at being able to capture that quality of light. So I couldn't do it as one piece. And it really is fun to see how far I can go with these.
Another student asks, what were you thinking when you made this artwork?
What I was thinking is this is a paint based on a painting by the American painter George Inness, who was considered one of the Hudson River School painters, a very important group of landscape painters in American art history. And once again, when I was up in that area outside of New York City in the Hudson River Valley, I noticed again that they were very adept at capturing that light. Now, the Delaware Water Gap is not in the Hudson River Valley. The Hudson River School painters painted all across the U.S.
Hmm.
But I really loved this distinct, very different look that was present in George Inness's work, especially. He really loves intense color, and his skies and his landscapes can be full of very unexpected colors. So that's what I was thinking when I was making this.
Fantastic. And I think that ties into the question that this student asked, which is, why did you choose pink instead of blue?
I did because I saw it in George Inness's painting.
Mm.
Um, all of these colors came out of his painter's palette.
Hmm.
And you can also notice the same atmospheric perspective in the previous painting in this one too, except the mountains as they go into the distance tend to go a little more purple than blue.
Hmm.
But that pink, I was really surprised to find in the George Inness painting, and I've been exploring a lot of his paintings and seeing all the really unusual colors that he uses that you wouldn't expect, but that look right.
Another student asks, were you at a sunset?
Oh, this would be close to a sunset, I would say, because you see the sky going from a very bright blue to that beautiful pinkish. And
Hmm.
what we see when that usually happens, what follows that, if you sit and watch the sunset, is that pink grows into a pretty vivid orange.
Another student asks, do people live there?
Uh, yes, that would be farmland. If you notice, there's areas that I try to suggest a forested area, but
Hmm.
there are also areas that look a little flatter that would be farmed fields.
And then another student asks, why did you title the image the way you did?
Fantasias is a term used a lot in music
Hmm.
where a composer takes a musical melody and really plays with it enormously. And I kind of felt that this whole series was a lot of me taking visual cues, very simple visual cues from an artist and playing with them wildly. So I think that it's appropriate to call these fantasias, just like a lot of orchestral composers use that term.
Fantastic. In fourth grade, I think Miss Rollins will love that music connection. I'll have to let her know. Mr. Kincaid, I do have a confession for you. When I uploaded this last image to the students, I did not set up the Google form correctly, and I did not give them a chance to respond to this image. However, I wanted to take this opportunity to share some comments that I thought were wonderful from the students.
Cool.
One student says, I like your blending. Another student says, this is amazing. Keep going. Another student says, nice work. And another student says, if you drew this, you are amazing.
I really appreciate all of that. Even though these are digital, the way I work on them is very much like you would work on Canvas anyway, except I'm working with a mouse or a Wacom tablet on a digital screen. But when the student talked about the blending, it's very important to me that looks just right. So I love that they picked that out.
Absolutely. And they gave up their opportunities to ask questions to give these comments. I thought that was wonderful.
Well, the comments mean a lot to me. I really love when people find joy in the work I do.
Absolutely. And I love that you chose these artworks to share with my students. I think they really resonated with them. Some questions the students have about this series and about being an artist in general, if that would be all right with you.
That's fantastic. Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, one question that I was just absolutely in love with that a student asked is, what do these artworks feel like up close?
That's a really good question because looking at art on a screen is very different than looking at a physical object.
Mm-hmm.
All of these that you looked at are very large. Some are 6 feet tall. Some are slightly more than 6 feet tall. So I want them to have a very big presence, much like landscapes and clouds always feel very big to us.
What inspired you to make these drawings?
My love of art from throughout history,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that I've learned so much about making art from looking at great paintings that I've really fallen in love with.
Wonderful. Another student asked, how did you make this series?
As I said, they are
Mm-hmm.
digital paintings. So I use a Wacom tablet. I use a mouse. You could do something like this on an iPad. There
Mm-hmm.
are many different ways to digitally create composition.
Fantastic. And I think that's something so exciting about art is it adapts with technology. So this is a great
Yeah.
example of that. Another student asks, what do the clouds represent?
The clouds represent to me, that's a good question, but I think they would represent joy and happiness to me.
I love that. That's wonderful. Another student asks, where do you live?
I actually live in the neighborhoods that feed into Plano West.
Mm,
So I live about a 12-minute drive from Plano West.
that's fantastic. And I think it was really important for us to connect with a local artist because artists come from everywhere.
Artists do come from everywhere.
Wonderful. What does it feel like to be an artist?
I don't know what it would feel like not to be an artist because I've drawn for so long
Mhm.
and made art for so long. I love it. It can be scary sometimes in a good way to not know what you're going to make next. And to learn that creativity is always different each time you start a new body of work. Um, Making something out of nothing is one of the coolest things I think that you can do. And an artist, a visual artist especially, starts with nothing. If you're a musician, you have a piece of music in front of you. And if you're an actor, you have a script in front of you. But if you're an artist, what's in front of you at the very beginning is whatever you choose to be in front of you. That could be a sheet of paper, that could be just space. Artists can create works while in nature, artists can create works in the studio. And so it's a scary, fun challenge.
Absolutely. I think that's the perfect word for it. Another student asks, what was the first painting you ever made?
I drew a lot of pirate ships when I was a kid. And so I would say my first painting was probably a pirate ship.
I love that. That's wonderful. I think it's always great to start with something you're passionate about.
Oh, yeah.
And our final question today, how do you feel about your paintings?
That's a good question because as an artist, sometimes you love them and sometimes you hate them, depending on different stages of how you're working on them. I tend to I tend to love the ones once they're finished, but there's also ones that you just have to let go because they don't work. Like I said, that's kind of the fun, scary challenge of being an artist. But I really love these.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's so great for my fourth graders to hear from an artist with so much experience. We really appreciate your perspective. Thank you for helping us understand you and your work.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed doing this, and I hope I see some of the fourth graders eventually in my class at Plano West.
Oh, I so hope so as well. Thank you so much.